I have some issues with my ancestors. How about you? Yeah, probably should clarify on that. I have issues with my ancestors. Do you have issues with your ancestors? Because let's be clear, I'm a cis white man from the South. You all have issues with my ancestors. There's rarely a heartwarming, independent film that comes out these days that includes white people that isn't about what bad Southerners have done. I have issues with some of my ancestors, and I don't have to go that far back to find disappointment. Let's just start with the ones I've met. Let's start with the ones who said things explicitly to me. I won't give quotes, but I have some issues with my ancestors. Let's just say people of color, women, and my own worldview were not highly respected growing up as a kid. Yet these same people taught me that I was loved unconditionally. These same people continue to stand by each other through the most difficult times I can imagine with love. One of the most complicated cultures I've encountered in my life is the one I left in Appalachia, where outsiders are suspect, where different is a threat, and where we take care of each other no matter how strange we are. You can be as strange as you want to be as long as you're one of us. And if you're one of us, there's no level of strange that will keep you from being welcomed and loved and taken care of. And once somebody finds their way into the community and is claimed and taken care of, doesn't matter where they came from, they're forever loved. I mean, they're talked about at the store, but they are loved. Bless their hearts. How can communities be judgmental and hostile and be completely and almost unconditionally loving and supportive? How can communities be welcoming of ignorance and carry such wisdom at the same blessed time? Over the years, I have discovered that the secret ingredient is love. Love is a thing that holds the contrasts in tension. Somehow. We all have our issues. We all have our biases. We all have our brokenness. And in the midst of them, love allows us to move forward. It would be easier if we dealt with our issues. It would be easier if we faced and named our biases. It would be easier if we healed our hurts. Of course, that would be easier, yes, but until this utopian reality sinks in, we all go to therapy and everyone decides to share unconditionally in this world. Love holds us together. Love's not an ideal, but the very glue, the very substance of God that keeps reality from fraying in the absence of ideals. Love is not a solution, but the balm, the very healing spirit that allows us to go forward when hope is fractured. Love is the universal translator that allows eye contact between strangers to prevent violence. Love is the universal translator that allows children to play and connect while adults sit back and pout and judge. Love is the universal translator that allows us to understand something of God that is beyond us. In our scripture today, Paul is writing to a church divided. In Corinth, a city, the church is trying to grow, it's trying to evolve into a new thing, but they've got lots of opinions on how it should be done. And there's no tradition yet. This is early in the church. We're talking 100s. Jesus was there from the year 4 to about 35. Not long into this. We don't have generations of the way we've always done it. And so they're asking for advice because they're not doing a good job of figuring it out together. Also, they're fearful. They want to get it right. And so the church, with all these strong opinions, has written to Paul with questions for Paul to answer. They have written to Paul with conflicts for Paul to address, and some might have even considered Paul's as their judge or their discerner over these. This is a regular source of scripture in the New Testament. It's a regular model. We've kind of been walking through the Bible over the last 20 weeks, looking at the chronological progression. And at this point, as we've moved past the Jesus stories, last week we picked up Pentecost and kind of the launching of the church. And now we get this period of correspondence as these young churches try to figure out what to do. So whether it's in Galatia or Corinth or Rome or Philippi, we get letters back and forth. Well, we get forth. We don't really get the back and forth. Sadly, we get one side of a correspondence, and we have to try to figure out what it means. Have you ever read one person's half of a love letter exchange? You don't always know what they're referencing. You don't get the inside jokes. You don't get the metaphors and the images. You certainly weren't there when the moment happened, right? We get one-sided communication, and we have to guess at the questions that Paul is responding to. We have to guess at how they're presented. It's not easy. It's not easy to discern what's there and what's missing. It's easier, honestly, let's just take snippets and take it literally. If we're going to interpret it, that's the easiest way to do it. Just take what's literally on the page and just apply it. But that would be dangerous, right? Especially if we only have half a conversation. It's more complicated to tease out specific instructions from ambiguous content. Looking around it, looking at the context, all of these change the way we read something. So we read this passage on love today, and it is beautiful, and it's prophetic. And Ellie took her time and just made it sing today, right? We've heard it at weddings. We've heard it at Christmas. We hear this text when we are challenged by hate, by division. We sink back into this image of love. But here's the fun thing. This is chapter 13. In chapter 11, Paul is responding to questions about who can prophesy and worship. And in chapter 11, he says, women who prophesy and worship should have their head covered or shaved. Because isn't that the appropriate thing to do? Again, he's in a different culture than ours. I don't know how many of the women in our community are going to shave their head in order to be heard speaking in public. We tend to judge women for their hair, unfairly so. It better look good in public, right? And if you put a head covering on, we're going to make cultural assumptions. Even if it's really cold outside and you want to make sure it looks good for dinner later. Paul also says at the end of chapter 11, but if this tradition causes any conflict, then we have no such tradition. In other words, if it gets in the way of you loving each other, throw out the little stuff. Don't let it catch you. Then we get chapter 12, where Paul talks about the many gifts and the one body of the church. Another scripture that gets read a lot of times. Weeks on Christian unity, when different denominations come together, we read this text. Unity. But what happens when it's hard? Chapter 13, love. Chapter 14 is where it says women should stay silent in church. And that's the only one that seems to get quoted. That's the only one that gets used as authoritative doctrine for the church. You've heard, women should be silent. You've never heard, you all should love each other. Where we go from the intent of things, from the depth of the church, from the beauty of God, from how we're supposed to treat each other into rules and beliefs. It's interesting where we have historically gone, and we realize it's been easier historically just to take a snippet. In the context of women can prophesy, and here's how, to women can't speak, it certainly can't be inerrant because it's arguing with itself. So maybe there's something more there. If we dig into that chapter a little bit, chapter 14, we discover that Paul is complaining about people talking over each other. People are talking in tongues in the same time as each other and no one's listening. Some are speaking in tongues and no one has the gift to interpret, and so it's wasted. And he says, if you have the gift of speaking in tongues and no one has the ability to interpret, you can't speak in a way that people can hear, then be silent and just talk to God about it. Wow. Paul says, don't be there all day. Have a few people share. Save the rest for later. Paul says not to be talking while others are talking. to let it be organized, to have a flow to things, for it not to be chaotic. And this is the point where he says, women, don't speak in church. If you have questions, ask your husband after. So is he talking about women preaching? No, he's talking about women whose husbands may not have let them come to worship before this when they were back in the Jewish synagogue. They have questions about how all this works. Their husbands are the ones who have privilege in community, hear more conversation. They're asking questions, and Paul's saying, don't interrupt worship with your questions. Ask afterwards. It's hard enough to get all these guys to pay attention and do what I've told them. So how do we figure out if women can speak or not? We read the whole thing, and we let love guide our interpretations. Love gives us the patience to stop and read the whole thing, the patience to dive in and learn more. And when something sounds like a contradiction to love, it leads us to ask more questions. If God is love, and if we truly believe that, any contradiction to love leads us into study, leads us into prayer, leads us into discernment. It leads us into a deep curiosity of what more might become. If we start with love, we will see each other as partners in the solution, not someone to debate the solution with. If we start with love, we will be patient, we will be kind, and we will not insist on winning the debate. But we will hear what the other says and see what we might learn from it. If we start with love, we see each other as partners in the solution. That's what our tradition and many others have done with this text over the years. Realizing Paul has already given women permission to prophesy. Realizing that the Spirit has given us different gifts. Hearing that love is the center of this whole thing in chapter 13. We get to 14 and are patient enough to read the whole blessed Scripture. Makes a lot more sense than a soundbite, doesn't it? How many sound bites have we heard in the last month? How many of you heard in the last 48 hours and wondered where the love was? Love is not just a warm, fuzzy emotion, and it's not just a passionate attraction. Love can be the source of our curiosity and our deeper dig. Love can be the thing that asks us to understand more. And love can be what reins us in and pulls us back from quick judgment and assumptions. Love can be the source of our grace, seeking to know more before acting. And love can be the agent of change, seeking justice as we see abuses and harms before us. Love is also something we pass down. It's something we share and gift to others. So I want to invite you to think about where you have received love. Where have you inherited love? What gift of love is framed in your mind? Where is love such a vivid picture? You can't forget it. What gift of love is lit as a candle, flickering in your life, illuminating everything else? Where does love highlight everything else in your life? On All Saints Sunday, we remember those who came before us, those who passed love on to us, those whose love and lives teach us to look into the face of others and see love. Teach us to look into a mirror and see our own face and see love. Those who teach us to remember, to hold on to such love. Whose love assured you that your skin color was beautiful? Whose love assured you that your culture was worth celebrating? Whose love assured you that your identity was worth claiming? Whose love assures you still to this day that you are worthy of God's grace? Whose love to this day assures you that you are lovable? This is the heart of our Christian faith. This is the core of Jesus' teaching. We are all lovable. We're all worthy of love, and we are all capable of loving and being loved. It's done communally. Jesus never told people what to believe. He never told people what to believe. Whole Sermon on the Mount. It's all about how to care for each other, how to serve each other. All the parables are about how to claim the things that are most important. Nowhere in there is there a list of beliefs that Jesus asked us to memorize. Jesus didn't tell us what to believe. Instead, Jesus constantly showed us how to love each other and as a community. Jesus showed us how to love. The core of the message: we are all lovable. We are all worthy of love. We are all capable of loving and being loved. Who will know these truths because of the love we have handed down?